In this episode, we're going to build an illuminated shop sign. To build our illuminated sign, we're going to need a few things. Some way to illuminate it. In this case, it's a RGB LED strips that you can get off eBay and Amazon. We're going to need something to mount everything together. In our case, I'm going to use a piece of 1/2 inch thick blonde plywood. Then we're going to need some sort of material to take the light from the LED strip and kind of diffuse it and kind of spread it out. So I opted for a piece of optics, just an acrylic sheet. And what we're going to have to do is frost this so that it diffuses instead of just passing the light straight through. And then the piece that we're going to actually illuminate, which is the real sign itself. And I cheated. Steve at Mayhem Metalworks actually cut this out for me as a gift when he cut out the brackets for the CNC plasma table conversion. You can do this by hand with plasma. You can cut it out with a jigsaw. You can make it out of aluminum, steel, plastic, wood, whatever you have and whatever you feel comfortable working with. Or if you don't feel like doing that, hit up Steve at Mayhem Metalworks, send him your design, and have him cut it out for you. Thanks, Steve. It's gonna make this a lot easier. Now, of course, when you go to make this sign, unless you get super lucky and the sign itself is actually the perfect size to the piece of plywood and the acrylic, which probably will never happen, you're going to have to cut the plywood and the acrylic. Again, you can do that by hand, or in my case, these came out of bigger sheets, and I simply took them over to my neighbor Jake. You guys remember Jake, right? No, not from State Farm. And he cut these out on his table saw. Just a good sharp blade will cut this acrylic. It does want to lift as it's cutting. So take your time. Make sure the blade's sharp when you're cutting this acrylic and you go slow. If it's dull or you're trying to cut too fast, it will actually start to melt. It'll stick to the blade and it'll try to rip it out of your hands, or it'll snap and send pieces everywhere. So be careful. Sharp blade, slow feed rate. So what I'm going to do is take this over to my belt sander, and all I've done is taken a Sharpie and left the plastic covering on the acrylic and marked it, and I'm going to take it to the belt sander right to that line. And I'm also going to have to pop a couple of holes that match our sign in it, and I'll just do that on the drill press. We need some way to fasten everything together. We are going to be sandwiching the plywood, the acrylic, the LED light strip, and the metal for the front of our sign all together. So we're going to use some through bolts, and on the back side of the wood backer, we're going to use some of these T-nuts, and you just simply set them in the hole, smack them with a hammer, and these teeth will set down into the wood and they won't spin. Now what we need to do is make our clear acrylic frosted. To do that, there's a few ways you can do it, but I'm gonna just use a little Scotch-Brite action. On here you can use steel wool or some wet dry sandpaper, some I think that by itself actually looks pretty sweet. We'll stain our backer board and then just Just need to install our LEDs. So after I frosted our acrylic, which I ended up having to not use the Scotch-Brite, I used some 220 grit sandpaper on both sides to get a heavier frost. I cut our RGB strips into the correct length and soldered some extensions on it so that it would lay flat, and I hot glued those extensions in place so they're not up in the way or flopping out past our sign. Got everything bolted together, as you can see, and to space it, what I did was when I ran the bolt through, I put a nut on the back and measured that, tightened that down once I had the right height, and that's what she looks like. I popped a hole in the back for the connector for the RGBs to connect to, and there's a little transformer and a remote sensor, and I'm going to bolt that right to the back of the board. But before I do that, I'm excited to see what it looks like, so I'm going to find a place to set it, and we're going to plug it in and see what it looks like. Got a remote, and I'm going to turn it on. This looks good. It's full bright. Pretty cool. But what I really want to see is how it looks when we turn the lights out. That actually looks pretty sweet. Well, that's that. I'm digging it. I think it came out really good. I can't wait to hang it up somewhere, maybe in the garage or in the house somewhere if my wife will let me. Steve at Mayhem Metalworks cut this out for me. But he can cut out any kind of design that you're thinking of out of multiple different types of materials. So if you want to make a sign like this and you don't feel like trying to cut this out by hand, or if you don't have your own CNC plasma or laser, definitely hit Steve up at Mayhem Metalworks. I'll put his information down in the description below. But other than that, I'll link everything I used in the description. But that's it. I think that's pretty sweet. Came out really good. I'm impressed. Until next time, guys, get out there and do it.